Hello, my name is Leah Tillman, and I'm a volunteer at the Jewish Historical Society. We are going to be interviewing Jack Stiassny, Lieutenant Jack Stiassny, for the Veterans History Project. Today is August 2nd, 2013. Good morning, Jack. Thank you so much for volunteering for the Veterans History Project that we're doing at the Jewish Historical Society. And I'm going to be asking you some questions, and we would appreciate it if you would sort of stick to the topic that I've asked about. So the first one is, tell us briefly about your family.
My mother was born in Poland, in a place called Sharlach. She emigrated during the First World War with her family to Vienna, where she met my father. My father was born and bred in Vienna. And ultimately, my mother came here with her family and then sent for my father, and they got married in the United States.
What was your parents' occupation?
My father was an electrical contractor. He had an office on 35th Street and 7th Avenue in New York City.
And where and when were you born?
I was born in New York City at St. Mark's Hospital. It doesn't exist anymore. May 25th, 1922.
And did you have any siblings?
No.
Now, how did you happen to serve in the military?
Well, I went to university at NYU, and I was in the ROTC for 4 years. Ordinarily, and during that period of time, the war started. And so in the interim, we served between my junior and senior year. We went out to work on behalf of the war industry. Ordinarily, if the war were not on, we would have gone to camp after our junior year for 6 weeks, came back, and when we graduated, would have graduated as a second lieutenant in the United States Reserve. But the war was on, and the camps, of course, were all filled with inductees. And so we didn't make that. So what happened was, at the end, when we graduated in '43, which was a very meager ceremony, we all went out to Camp Yapang in Long Island and were inducted in as privates. Okay? We were there for about a week. We had a great time because we paraded, and we because there were any number of us.
Mm-hmm.
And then we came back and we were involved with an ASPA, I think, program that the government set up, where they sent civilians to the campus to train in aeronautics and mechanics and so forth. But they had to get into the military. They had to learn how to take a gun apart. And we did that.
I see.
I was inducted. I lived on Loring Place, as a matter of fact. They took over apartment houses and we lived there. Anyway, waiting for us to go to OCS. Ultimately, I went to OCS at Fort Monmouth.
Can you repeat the fort? What fort?
Signal Corps.
You said ultimately you went to OCS at
Fort Monmouth.
Monmouth.
In New Jersey.
Okay. So what was your specialized training?
Was in electrical engineering. But they put me into the signals. Well, the ROTC at NYU started with an engineer corps and an artillery corps. And in our senior year, they started a signal corps. And electrical people generally joined that if they were in the ROTC. I mean, all the students weren't, they were selected. And so from there, it was automatic that I would go to Fort Monmouth, which was the signals center for the United States Army.
How did you adapt to military life?
I had no problem at all. From a personality point of view, I adapt to anything. It's just, it was fine.
You had no problems with the physical regimen, the barracks, the
Not
food?
Not at all. Get up in the morning, do like, do a reveille and do exercise, and have your breakfast, and go for long hikes, and then go to training, like, become familiar with military equipment and so forth.
And did you have any Jewish discrimination?
None.
During your
not up
experience?
until then, none.
And did you have any experience with the Jewish community where you trained?
No. You mean in Fort Monmouth?
Yes.
No.
So you had no social life?
Oh, I guess I do. I mean, the war was on. There wasn't a hell of a lot of social life going on, okay?
Now, can you describe your wartime service?
I went to OCS.
Mm-hmm.
I became a second lieutenant. And we waited for orders to go somewhere. And eventually we got orders to get on a train and head west. And I still didn't know where we were going quite. And so we headed west and ended up in, I always think, Riverside, California. And once again, we had to wait a week or two before we got orders to get on a ship and sail. And again, I didn't know quite where we were going. We could have gone to Hawaii, I suppose, or certainly not the islands, because they were occupied by the Japanese. We had to fight back. We had to fight to win them back. But that theater, parenthetically, was the South Pacific Theater. And I ended up in Australia under General MacArthur's headquarters, which was in Brisbane, Australia at the time. He came out of the Philippines and he set up a GHQ in Brisbane, and I was assigned there. Anyway, got on a ship. It was a converted freighter into an aircraft carrier, and we transported P-39s and P-47s to the war zone. The problem was that we ran into a huge storm just before we got to Australia, and all the lashings on the decks and so forth were ripped off, and the planes were one on top of the other. Saw that the morning after, okay, because during the storm we were holed up below. And it's interesting because when we got to Eagle Farms, the dock in Brisbane, Australia, the Army or the Air Force refused to take the planes because they were damaged. So I think they ended up dumping them. I don't really know. Anyway, we got to Brisbane, Australia, and my first billet was in a converted horse stall in the racetrack. They converted all the stalls, and the officers slept in the stalls or billeted in the stall. That was temporary, incidentally. And in the field, they had tents, and the GIs were in the tents in the middle of the field. And that was my first experience because I saw men coming back from the war zone in New Guinea, and they were emaciated. They were ill and emaciated. And I remember, because an aircraft carrier has a ship store, you could buy anything you want. And I happened to buy a bunch of chocolate bars and stuff. I gave them each 2 chocolate bars. It was great. I get emotional when I think about it.
Oh, yes, it's very emotional.
But anyway, and pretty soon I got orders, and I was sent to headquarters, General MacArthur's headquarters, to the Signal Center. We had what amounts to an office job. We had, you know, obviously the war went on 24 hours a day, so we did a day shift, we did a swing shift, but we did a graveyard shift, and we rotated. And there were 4 of us, I think, 4 or 5.
What were your duties?
Well, we transmitted information to Washington from MacArthur's staff, and we received instructions from him, and we transmitted information to the war front. Actually, it was very soon after that MacArthur moved up to Port Moresby in New Guinea and established general headquarters there. So we became general headquarters rear, okay? And I stayed there for my entire experience.
Tell me about some of the friendships that you've formed there, or the camaraderie you have.
I'm in touch with Colonel Charles Yerkes. He stayed in the service, and he lives in Williamsburg, Virginia, and I'm in touch with him all the time. Matter of fact, I have a picture behind me that I received from him recently.
Very nice.
We were very close. We went through a lot of interesting experiences. I called him Chuck. Okay, Chuck he wanted to get into the war. I wasn't that anxious to get into the combat, but he wanted to see what it was like. So he did a lot of tricky things to get up there, just for a day or 2 and come back. Well, I mean, I had a lot of interesting experiences. A lot of interesting experiences.
Can you tell me one story?
Well, we had a courier service, and the couriers would leave and take off wherever they went, and with a bag and attached to their arms and so forth. And Chuck made a deal with one of the couriers to take over his duty. I think if he got lost, nobody would know it. Nobody would know it, and the courier, he probably would have gotten into big trouble. But we had a lot of we did all the code work. Everything was coded. We had wax that operated teletype machines, and so that's how we transmitted to Washington, for example, and couldn't to the war zone. Didn't have teletypes, so that's where you had couriers, you know. And what would happen when we get a message coded, we decode it. I'd have to edit it for garbles, and then send it up to headquarters, which was in the Lennon Hotel in Brisbane, Australia.
What did you do for recreation or off-duty?
Well, I'm not sure that I can, I don't know that I didn't, you know, that's a difficult question, because, you know, we had a routine. I suppose we have to call it a routine. We'd end up on day shift, and then we'd go to the officers' club, and we'd eat hot boiled eggs and drink beer, and do the crossword puzzle. And then they had dances, and so we would go to dances. I did anyway, for sure. I got to know, I always say 250 women, between the WACs, the Red Cross workers, the nurses, and the civilian women, okay? And never got attached particularly, and just had a great time.
How did you stay in touch with family and friends at home?
We had, I've forgotten what they call it, but I wrote to them regularly. Wrote to my parents. As a matter of fact, I had a footlocker with a lot of communications I got back, and somebody disappeared. But I wrote to my family, and then they didn't know where I was. I had an APO number, and so I was an APO whatever, and if I did write a letter, I would assume that they monitored it or whatever, and crossed out whatever information might have been inadvertently mentioned that wasn't supposed to be. And I kept in touch with them that way. But I also want to tell you that when I got to Brisbane, Australia, it was about 3 weeks before Passover. And so I knew this. I called the chaplain. His name was Chomsky. I often wonder whether he was related to the famous Chomsky in California. And I asked him, you know, what goes on? And he said, you come to the Elizabeth Street Synagogue, and everything will be taken care of. So sure enough, first Seder night, I went to Elizabeth Synagogue. There were hundreds of military people. They came from England. They came from, they were Dutch from Indonesia. And of course American GI, Army, Navy, and whatever. Well, apparently, you know, the community, there was a Jewish community there, had arranged for this in advance. And so many people were already assigned to families for Seder. But then there was this huge residue of people. And so we all went to the vestry in the back. They had a big hall. They, what used to be the Jewish Welfare, JWB here, Jewish Welfare Board, sent matzahs, wine. I had in this footlocker, I had all the labels and everything. It's good. And anyway, there were hundreds of us, and the rabbi conducted whatever. The next day I went to services. And after services, Chaplain Chomsky comes to me. He was there, came over to me, and he said, what are you doing for lunch? And I said, I'm going to my barracks, I'm going back. He said, no, you're going to come with me to the family. So went to the Newhouse family. Well, I served. They had a Seder every year. I was there every week, Friday night, and people would come down from the war zone. It's unbelievable. You have to see these, you have to experience the way they looked and how they felt, and you know, to see all this food that they hadn't seen. And but it was like a family. It was a great big family. They also got to know the rabbi very well. The rabbi had 3 daughters. And I accompanied him home. I walked home with him many times. I suspect he thought I might latch on one of his daughters. Once again, parenthetically, one of his daughters married a commander who lives in South Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina. I'm telling you all this, it's sort of mixed up, but when I was the president of the JCC in Stanford, I had to hire a director, and I hired Saul Cohen, and he had been the director in Charleston, and he knew the rabbi daughter and so forth.
Isn't it a small world? So tell us where you were at the war's end and how you returned home.
Oh, I was in Brisbane. I was in Brisbane a year after, well, it goes beyond that. Let me back up. At one point, I was called in and I was told to create a platoon of people from cooks right up to operators, code people. And we were going to go to Darwin, Australia and set up a communication place, because by this time MacArthur had already entered Manila or the Philippines, and we were getting ready to invade Japan. So I did that. We were ready to go be on our way when they dropped the bomb and the war ended. So we never accomplished that particular mission. We were going to be the liaison between China, Burma, India theater, Mountbatten, and MacArthur in our theater in the invasion. And it didn't happen. But anyway, so that the war ended, and I was there a year after because I was left alone virtually, although the Army hired back some of our people as civilians. They stayed in Australia as civilians, and they came to work in the civil side.
Oh, interesting.
But I had the responsibility of getting rid of all the coding equipment, went to Sydney and delivered whatever. I had had a rather interesting experience at one time. I went to Sydney on leave, and it was during the holiday season. And of course, I went to the sorry.
That's all right.
The organization that did all the Bob Hope shows and everything.
USO?
USO, thank you. Thank you. Went to USO. There were a lot of volunteers. I sat down at the counter, and this woman comes up. She's a mature woman, and she serves me breakfast. And then she says to me, "You're Jewish, aren't you?" I don't know how she did that, but she did. I said, "Yes." I said, "As a matter of fact, I'm was going to try to find out where I could go to services, tonight, Yom Kippur night, those whatever. Don't you worry, you'll take care of it." So sure enough, she introduced me to where I had to go, and I sat in the row right with her husband and her brother-in-law and the whole family. And we went home. Well, we didn't. We broke the fast. The next day, we broke the fast at her house, at their house. A lot of vignettes, a lot of stories, I suppose.
But how did you get home?
I got home on a ship, 28 days, on a freighter that had been carrying wool from Australia to China and coal from China back to India, to Australia, back and forth. They had they did many trips, and finally they were going back to the United States.
And where was that in the United States? Where did you land?
Well, we were supposed to go through the Panama Canal into Boston, but our communications broke down. We lost a transformer. So I helped them rewind the transformer, put them back into service. So when they communicated with their home office, they were told, instead of going through the canal at this point, because it was rather tenuous, you know, how long we would last, and we ended up in San Francisco.
What was your reception like when you returned?
Say again?
What was your reception like when you returned to the United States?
From home.
From people, your family?
Well, I didn't see my family for another couple of 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
It was arrive in San Francisco, take a lighter, go on shore, stayed in a big facility with all kinds of cots and people coming from the zone, waiting to go home, waiting for orders. I was there about 3 days and go up train. Train was like 3 cars. We went across the country to Chicago, and when I look back, when they stopped, I mean, we kept piling on cars, you know. And ended up back in Fort Dix, and got to Fort Dix, and we don't have time, go home and come back in 2 weeks for your discharge.
How did you readjust to civilian life?
I didn't have any problem at all. I work with my father. Well, I always say from the age of 8. It's true. And so, you know, when I came back, I went back to his shop and I worked with him. But then I mean, he was a small operator, and I thought I just wanted to see what the world was like out there. And so I left and I went to work for a company and another company. I didn't move around too much.
Aside from the people you've already mentioned, have you kept in contact with your fellow veterans?
Only Chuck Yeakers.
Okay. How did the war affect your life subsequently?
Not at all. I stayed in the reserve until one day I got a notice that they were having a meeting in downtown New York at the AT&T auditorium. And I went to that meeting and I did meet some of I met my colonel, I met a lot of officers, okay? And these guys got up on the platform and they were ready to go back to war against Russia. And that was not nothing that I wanted to be associated with. So I just resigned.
How did the war affect your life?
Didn't affect it. To my best of my knowledge, I don't think it affected it. I went back to work and I had a girlfriend. But I don't know, just
Well, can you reflect on any of the life lessons that you may have learned in the military?
discipline. I still maintain certain things. You know, I have to make sure that everything where I'm dressed is right. There are any number of things that my military life, from ROTC right through, I answered the question, discipline.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to add that is unique or noteworthy about your experience in the military?
I didn't have that, you know, it wasn't the kind of experience that a combat person would have, a person in combat, a person in the Air Force would have, for example. It was like a civilian job. It was like, matter of fact, when I came back home, I didn't go back to work for my father right away. I thought I would do the same thing that I did for the military, for Western Union, RCA, but I was so disappointed with the kind of reception that I got when I came back. With, you know, they didn't need my experience or whatever. And that was a big mistake, but that's okay. So I went back and I helped my dad. We had a great time. But when I left him, I think I broke his heart, you know. But I had to see it. But then when I went to work again, I got a job, and I got involved in some pretty major work, and I think he was pretty proud. You know. He died at a very young age. He never had the benefit of seeing really my advance.
Mm. Well, Jack, this has been very interesting, and I want to thank you so much again for volunteering to do this video.
Been a privilege.
Thank you.